Is the lack of control causing you anxiety, or is it the need to feel like you're in control? Today we're going to talk about the cost of control, why we crave it, the anxiety that it causes us, and what the real power is that God promises us. Alright, so today's episode is probably also going to be a part 1 and a part 2 because I have a lot of notes. Today we'll be talking about this book. It's called The Cost of Control by Sharon Miller. And I read it for a Bible study. And shame on me because I didn't actually go to the study. But I did read the book and I thought it was really good. So now I want to share it with you guys. And I have here with me today my amazing husband, Juanada. Hey, babe.
What's up?
Shout out to him because he's actually sick and he is
No, I'm not.
here. Okay, we're not declaring that. All right, well, I appreciate you being here today. All right, so the book was broken up into 4 different parts. The first one is why we control, how we control, what it cost us, and the real power God promises. So, do you feel like this is something that you can relate to?
Yeah. I struggle with being a control freak, so yeah.
I don't know if I think for me it's like certain areas of life. Because I think I can be okay with not being in control. You think so?
Everybody's different.
Yeah.
I think it's your personality. Like type A personalities want to be in control. If you're not, I don't know what the other types say, but if you're not type A.
Yeah, because according to DISC, you're the D, the dominant personality.
Yeah.
And I'm more of like the laid back personality. Like I can sit here and just listen to you talk to anyone.
Yeah.
And I'm okay. And I can not be in control. And I'm okay with that. So I think reading this book really opened my eyes because I hear people saying that they have anxiety almost as like a part of their identity. And I never understood it because I'm like, I've felt anxious before, but then the feeling goes away and it's not something that I identify with. But reading this book, I was like, oh, maybe it's because they feel like they need to be in control all the time. And that's why they feel like they have anxiety instead of like sometimes they feel anxious.
It's probably deeper rooted than that, but I think that could like stir it up. It can stir it up in somebody if they feel like they're in a situation where they don't have control. I mean, when I hear that, I automatically go to like worst case scenario. You're in the bank and a bank robbery happens. You're out of control. You don't have the gun. You're not the one controlling the situation. You just have to respond and do whatever you can, right? Whether it's listen to them or try to get out of there, or if your fight or flight kicks in, however it goes. But you're not in control, so you're anxious. You don't know if you're going to make it out of there. That's what my mind goes to. But I think you can take that down and scale it to a smaller level. And, a job interview. You're anxious for a job interview because you don't get to determine the outcome. It's in somebody else's hands. So I think that can stir up people's anxiety, and just knowing that they're going to be judged can start making them not even want to do that job interview. So little things, but like my mind goes to like extreme.
Do you think those people also have like bigger traumas?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's something else behind it that riles it up.
Yeah, because we all have traumas, right? Yeah. I have my own set that I grew up with. You have your set, and you don't know everyone's story, so that it also makes me wonder if. And we'll talk about it later too, but it talks about how victims will put blame on themselves just so that they can feel like they can prevent it from happening again. So there's so many factors to it. The book was really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so why do we want to control? So she says humans cannot tolerate uncertainty. And then she used the story of how some people predicted that Jesus was coming on this year or whatever year. And there was a guy on the radio, and he said on this day, Jesus is coming back. And there were billboards and everything. And some people even killed themselves. I'm not sure why, but he caused this big chaos. And she says, we have this need to know everything and to feel like we're in control. that we even make up what day he's coming back. And even today, if you look on TikTok, I'm sure you'll find a video that'll tell you the exact date, the exact time. Even though the Bible says that not even the Son knows when he's coming back. But that's like a type of, like, that need for control, the need to, like, I guess as humans, we just hate uncertainty.
Yeah.
And then she defines control as the power to influence the world around us and the sense of empowerment it gives us, almost becoming an idol. So it's almost like control becomes an idol for some people.
Yeah, I mean, you see it with everything going on right now. All the people, like entertainment industry, right? The ones who had the most money and they were controlling the other people, and led them to do other things and all that. All the scandals and all that that's coming out. So it was a sense of control, right? They felt like they controlled their part by getting to success. Now they wanted to control other people because they needed more sense of control. They needed to just control more and more.
Yeah, and I think that's what it comes down to, just being able to control. Like all this stuff, evil stuff that people are doing.
Yeah.
It's like a need for control.
Yeah, because most of it stems from wanting to make their life better, or for, it's all self-gain because you're trying to control your future.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people who do it, start off doing it for the right reasons, like, hey, I'm trying to better myself and stuff like that, and then they get wrapped up in it, and that control just takes over, or that want to feel of control and dictating where your future's going.
And then she talks about the illusions of control. So sometimes we think we're in control, but we're really not. Or we do things to make us feel like we are in control. And she used the example of there's a hurricane coming and you're checking the app and you're refreshing and then last minute it doesn't even hit where you live. You were never actually in control.
Yeah.
You spent all that time worrying.
Yeah, I mean, I experienced that at work when Barrel hit and we worked through that and it sucked. Working through it, we were fighting the plant and everything the whole time during it, afterwards, and all that. So when I forget what it's called, that came right after it, the one that went up the armpit of Florida. We were watching that the whole time. I was the one on the computer refreshing it because the older guys didn't know how to work the computer, so I was the one doing it, and I was the one refreshing it and watching it, monitoring it most of the time. I had it up on the screen, but I was the one doing that. And it was just, we weren't refreshing it because, I don't know, I don't think I was like, I control, but it was the need to know. It was like, because I was like, what do me and you need to do? What I need to do at home? So it was the need to know, so that way I could feel like I did what was in my control by getting the house ready or whatever I needed to do. But yeah, I mean, it was a false sense of control because it's a hurricane. I have no control. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to put our trust in God always and know that He's the one who's in control, not us. Because when Barrow did hit and we got a text saying, take shelter, you were on the road driving to work.
Yeah.
And thank God He was watching over you and He was protecting you. So really, like, that just goes to show how much control we don't have.
Yeah, that was a big reflection for me. I consider myself a pretty good driver, driven through, I think we talked about this before on here, I'm not sure. But, I mean, I've driven through storms, whatever. I'm pretty comfortable driving in most situations. But I was driving through, 90 mile an hour winds, 90 plus mile an hour winds. And it was just sliding my truck across the highway. And I didn't have any control. And I was just like, well, shit. I just said shit. But I was just like, well, if it gets any worse, I might have to just park on the side of the road and get in the ditch, because I started getting tornado warnings. Tornado, like, what was it?
Alerts?
Yeah, tornado watch and then tornado warnings saying they were coming in. And I was just watching transformers blow up on the side of the road as I was driving. And then you'd see limbs just go across the highway. So it was pretty sketchy. I had no sense of control. all I could do was slow down and try to keep it on the road.
Were you praying?
Was that? I mean, yes, I was just like, God, like, get me there safely, take care of the house. I wasn't panicking praying, but I was just trusting in him more or less.
Okay, good.
Like, it wasn't a verbally out loud. I was just focused in on that, and in my mind, I was just like, hey, like, get me there, guide me, protect you at home, and make sure everything's good there. But it wasn't like anxiety didn't come over me.
Good. I remember it was during my first trimester when I was feeling the worst, and I get the notification that says shelter in place, and Lily, your cousin's texting me, my friend. I'm just going to refer to her as Lily.
Yeah. If you don't know who she is, it's fine.
Yeah. She's texting me, and she's like, how are you doing? Like, just checking in on me. And I'm thinking, I'm like, oh my God, he's on the road. And she was like, make sure to take shelter. Like, where are you at? And I was like, Juan's in the middle of the road. And I don't feel good, so I'm just going to continue to lay here. I was like, if he's on the road and he's fine, then I'll be fine here on the couch. Yeah. But I was praying for you the whole time. I was like, oh my goodness.
Oh, thank you.
But at the same time, I also didn't feel... Like, obviously, naturally, I'm going to feel a little scared. But I took that to God, and I was like, hey, I know you're watching over him. Please protect him.
Yeah, and it's okay to worry. God doesn't say don't worry, but he says don't be anxious. Yeah. And that's where your faith comes in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I only went in because, like I had told you, I was like, you're good here at the house. The house is good. I know my coworker that I was going to go relieve, they had, the storm was going to hit them. And he had an 8-month-old baby and a 1-year-old, and his wife was at home by herself. Mm-hmm. So I was like, Yeah,
I thought that was so sweet of you.
Yeah.
But we also didn't know that was going to happen.
Yeah, we didn't know it was going to be as bad as it was. I didn't know it was going to be... I would have waited. He would have had to wait at work too. Yeah. Or he could have left early or whatever, but I would have waited if I would have known it was like that.
Yeah. Yeah, but it just goes to show how not in control we are. And even if we are in a situation that's super dangerous, we can trust in him and know that he will protect us.
Yeah.
She also used the example of athletes doing superstitious things to win a game.
Yeah, like not changing their underwear.
Or washing their socks. Just being out there all stinky. That's gross.
Yeah.
But it gives them a sense of doing something to win the game. Even fans.
Oh, yeah.
You'll hear of fans doing things and it's like, dude, you're not even playing.
Yeah, they'll be like, I have to sit in my chair, the whole time. It has to be facing this way or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a false sense of control.
So then she said that studies show a link between feeling out of control and experiencing anxiety disorders. So whenever people feel like they're not in control, a lot of the times anxiety disorders are associated with that. But then she says on the flip side, you have people who, when they feel like they are in control, they don't experience anxiety or they don't feel anxious. Mm-hmm. But she said even if it's a false reality, even if they're like telling themselves something that's not true, mm-hmm. like if they're convincing themselves that they're in control somehow.
Yeah.
Even if they're probably not.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to understand. Like I said earlier, not having control can cause anxiety. That's kind of easy to understand. If you're just depending on yourself, because you're going to fail over and over and over again. No matter what it is or how good you are, you're not perfect, so you're going to fail at some point. So if you're trusting in yourself, you're going to fail. I guess I could think about like back when I used to do scaffolding. I don't know if it was a false sense of control, but I knew I was tied off. I knew what I was doing, and I knew exactly how to do it, and I didn't get anxious. I would just do it. I'd go out, 300 feet in the air, walk out, and go do what I needed to do. Versus the other person, we're doing the exact same thing. We both know how to do it, and you'd see them kind of like, not everybody, right? But you would see those people who would get real anxious, get real nervous and stuff like that because they didn't feel in control. And I was like, I tighten it up. I know where I tied off to. I'm controlling my surroundings is what I felt like. But a clamp could break, a weld could break. I didn't really have control, but I felt like I had control, so I had confidence in it.
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
That it could not even be you slipping. It could be something else happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't do that anymore, but we just watched the video at work when we had our communication meetings about some plant somewhere. They were doing, they're doing a hot bolt, which it's not exactly a hot bolt because it means you'd have process and you're taking one bolt off and replacing it at a time. But they were torquing down when they had brought it up to temperature. They had a torque wrench, so they thought they were in control of how much they were torquing, but they torqued on carbon steel, and then they went to graphite, and they didn't have any specs, so they put 40 pounds of torque on it when it needed 15, and they cracked the graphite, and all that came out, and it killed 3 people. When they thought they had the PPE on that was going to protect them, they thought they had the torque wrench specs for 40 pounds. It was a false sense of control, so they were confident in doing it. And it was something they didn't really have control.
Yeah. I haven't done a safety meeting in so long. I forgot about that. Never be overconfident. Never feel like you're actually in control.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just brought back some memories. They were twerking.
What?
That's what it sounded like. Yeah, so she says that we crave that stability because our spirit craves that, because that's the world that we once belonged to. That's the world that God created. No chaos. Everything was in order. When Adam and Eve were in the garden, there was control. But then, of course, sin messed all of that up. And then she says that we don't actually have control, but what we do have is, she calls it agency. And what that basically is self-control, which the Bible talks about. And she talks about how we can only control ourselves. And even then, there are times, like we mentioned earlier, that we do let ourselves down. But we'll talk more about that in another chapter. And then she talks how we're so prone to self-deceive, to the point to where some people started using the phrase "my truth," willing to invent a personalized version of reality. And we were talking about that earlier, my truth, how that became popular. But really all it is my point of view.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that there are different truths out there.
Yeah. I like how Matt Walsh would be like, what is truth? And then they'd be like, my truth. So, no. What is truth? I forget what movie we watched. But
Probably What's a Woman?
Yeah, that's what it was. Mm-hmm. And they'd be like, well, my truth. He's like, no, there's not my truth. There's a truth, and there's not the truth. And they're like, my truth. And he's like, no. Like, you can see him get frustrated, and it's understandable because they're like, my truth. And that's not a real thing. There's not a my truth and your truth. There's one truth.
Mm-hmm. And that's God.
Yes.
Yeah. This episode was sponsored by the Injury Paralegal with Adame Garza Law Firm. If you guys are ever in an accident, they are the people to call. I personally used them whenever I was in an accident, and throughout the whole process, they always made me feel like family, like my health was their priority, and they were able to get me a settlement that I was happy with. So if you guys are ever in this situation, I recommend you save her phone number. I'll share it on the screen. Go follow her on Instagram, the Injury Paralegal, and just have this information on you because you just never know. Hopefully nothing ever happens, but at least that way, for example, when it happened to me, I had the adrenaline going. This had never happened to me. I wasn't sure what to do. I called Monse, and then she guided me throughout the whole process. They also speak Spanish, so if you or a family member doesn't speak English, you guys can also give them a call. And that's why he says he is the truth. So whatever he says is truth, and everything else is just opinions. And I'll even see that a lot on different podcasts where people are giving their opinions and they're arguing about it. And I'm like, why are they even having this argument? This is in the Bible. Like, there is one truth. And just because you argue very loudly doesn't make what you're saying more truth than somebody else's truth.
Yeah.
And like I was telling you earlier, Sadie had a sermon or a talk, or I don't know what they're called, but she was preaching on it. And she was saying how truth used to be, when you told someone the truth, it was like a way to be caring and loving. Whether they wanted to hear it or not, you were being loving to the person by telling them the truth and not lying to them. And she used the example. She was like if I were to tell someone, you have spinach in your teeth. She's like, I'm watching out for them. And she was like, well, what if instead of them saying like, oh, thank you, and removing it, they were like, well, the spinach is nurturing my teeth, and that's my truth.
Yeah.
Like, that's how silly it sounds. Like,
yeah, but the sad part is nowadays there's people that are like that.
Yeah. Yeah. With so many different things.
Yeah.
The gender thing. Some people identifying as cats. That video you sent me.
Yeah.
You want to say what the video was?
A cop pulled over some two guys in a car, and then he asked for his license. The guy's like, I don't have a license because I'm a cat. And he's like, okay, well, if you're a cat can't operate a vehicle, so I'm gonna have to call the pound. And since you're a stray cat, you're gonna have to get a spade and then
Rabies shot.
Yeah, your rabies shot, and you're gonna go to the pound, and you're gonna have to get $70 for somebody to bail you out. Or he tells the guy, he's like, for your dude to bail you out. He's like, how dare you think we're in a relationship? And then he's like, okay, well then let me go ahead and call for the pound. And then the guy who was driving looks at the passenger and he goes, what should we do? And he's like, I don't know. And he's like, well, I'm going to call a mental health expert out here to check on you for even considering letting him go to the pound and getting a rabies shot. And it just showed how he handled it so well, but how lost people can be, and they're my truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that was their argument. It's my truth.
Yeah.
I think I'm a whatever. Fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then she talks about what happens when that illusion that you had is shattered. And when she talked about that, for me, what came to mind was 2020. How everyone just went crazy a little bit, buying toilet paper, and I don't know what exactly they were planning on doing with that. But everybody didn't know how to act. They didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And
it was all the uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to feel a sense of control by buying toilet paper.
Maybe.
I don't know what they were controlling, but it gave them some weird sense.
Yeah, I guess they're like, well, whatever happens,
yeah,
our butts are good.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but it just showed how it's almost like we live in a
dumb society.
Well, I was thinking, I don't know if I should call it like a simulation, but how unreal our reality is, if that makes any sense. Everybody thought they were in control, living their lives, and then out of nowhere they're told, you can't go to work, you can't go to the grocery store.
I get you.
And then everybody's freaking out.
Yeah, how easily our sense of reality is disrupted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then now that I don't want to say the name of it, is still around, but everybody goes around living life normally.
Yeah.
So what actually changed? Did anything actually change? It's still around.
Yeah.
The media's just not making a big deal about it anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't know. To me, that's just so crazy how much, and going back to power, how much power they have.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you just look at, you could just talk about the IRS and how much power they have if somebody filed their taxes wrong. Mm-hmm. And they use, that meme, it's like, how do I file my taxes? You don't know. You have to figure it out. And they're like, there's a tool for that. Okay, cool. So what if I do it wrong? Then we're going to fine you and take you to jail. And they're like, well, how are you going to know I did it wrong? Oh, there's a separate tool for that. So why don't you just do it or give me that tool from the beginning so that I can follow them correctly? It's like, it doesn't make any sense.
It also doesn't make any sense how the government lost millions of dollars and they don't know where it's at.
Oh, yeah, they know where it's at.
But the moment that you fill out the IRS or the form wrong.
Yeah, they can just.
Yeah.
They're mathematicians all
They're
of a sudden.
like, where's your money at?
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. They do know. That's just what they say.
Yeah.
We're living in crazy times. All right, so the next section is how we control. So she lists several different ways, and the first one is knowledge and information, and we'll go into each one. Second one is power, money, autonomy, theology, and shame. So let's start with knowledge and information. So in Genesis 3:5, it says that the serpent told Eve, "You will be like God, knowing good and evil." So the fact that it started with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've shown frustration towards Eve before,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't because I know how much I love knowledge and I love to read. And even if it gives me like a false sense of control, I guess that's my way of feeling in control. It's through knowledge. Yeah, I guess that's how everybody's different. And then she talked about how the iPhone has, well, mine doesn't show it, but has a bitten apple.
Mm-hmm.
And she said it has us consuming more information than we actually need. It says, however, when our relationship with knowledge is rightly ordered, it produces humility and wisdom. So we're not saying that knowledge is bad, but seeking knowledge in order to feel in control can be really bad. And for me personally, I was doing that with politics. I'll go down rabbit holes. I'll be watching all these interviews, seeing how the media is manipulated by the left, how they're owned by them, all this stuff, right? Just stuff that's making me mad at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Because how am I actually going to change that? I mean, I can know how I'm going to vote.
You'll be informed.
I'll be informed.
But not consumed.
Yeah. But I'm saying, like, how is me learning about everything actually going to change anything?
Yeah. That's why, like, forgot what she exactly said, but I was like, oh, ignorance is bliss. Mm-hmm. It's like Adam and Eve, how you were saying, they had, the perfect life. Mm-hmm. But as soon as that, because they didn't know they were naked, they didn't know that there was things out there that were bad for them. They just knew. The only thing they knew is not to eat from that tree. It's the only thing they were worried about. They had no other worries or anything like that. As soon as they ate, they realized they were naked, and they realized like the other things were out there, and like we need to get clothes, we need to hide. They knew they did wrong. So in that sense, ignorance was bliss, right? Because they didn't know, and it was protecting them. Mm-hmm. And as soon as they did find out, then that's when all sin came in, and now everything they came from that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I sometimes try to remind myself
Sorry.
That I don't need to know everything and I don't need to understand everything. Because at the end of the day, I never will know everything and I never will understand everything. And even if God gave us like the option to be like, do you want to know everything? I don't think our human brains could handle it.
Yeah.
I don't think as a human I could handle knowing everything.
I don't think I want to.
No. Even like now, sometimes I'll take a course or I'll watch something and I'll feel overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that was a lot of information. I need to sit down and process it. Or you find out about things that corrupt people are doing, and it just makes me so mad. And I'm like, why? What's the point of this?
Yeah.
Why? God's the one who's in control. He's the one who's going to judge them. He's the one. All I can do is pray. That's it.
Yeah.
Just pray and have faith that he's in control.
Yeah.
It says, we try to use facts and knowledge to control others, but sometimes that backfires. Some people will not change their minds no matter the information presented to them. And it says, when beliefs are tied to identity, new information feels like a threat to one's identity, so they reject it. Mm. And I put politics as an example. Like, you can present people with the facts all day long, but if they have a belief tied to their identity, they're not going to listen. Like, they're just going to turn a blind eye to all the facts, and they're going to be like, no, but because it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. Because they don't want to feel stupid or like
they don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
I guess that could kind of be like how Rogan was just talking about with JD Vance. Like RFK trying to get healthier food, and they're not even paying attention to he's looking out for them, for their health and for their kids' health by having better food and pulling out like seed oils and all that. They're just like, oh, he's a conservative bigot that's, whatever he says, he's just trying to attack us. And it's like, he's actually, it doesn't matter what side he's on. He's just trying to make the food industry be healthier.
Mm.
But they identify with that. So that identity right there.
Yeah.
They won't even
He's
listen.
actually been on both parties.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, he's literally been on both parties.
Yeah.
Being like, somebody please listen to me.
Yeah.
And people will hate on him because now he's not a Democrat anymore.
Yep.
Or like someone, even on my Instagram, a girl had commented like he never was, or like he's not a real Democrat or something like that. And I'm like, what? But I know I try to like ignore those comments because I'm like, you can't argue with them.
It's like arguing with a wall.
Yeah. And I also heard that aside from that, no matter what facts you present to them, their beliefs or their mindset is always going to be with what the people around them believe.
Mm.
So whatever their social circle says is okay, that's what's okay with them, and they'll defend it even if they're wrong.
Yeah.
And they will never admit, or sometimes they won't even see that they're wrong because they're like, but the people that I love and trust say this, so this must be true.
Yeah.
And the only way they'll change their mind is if their circle starts to change, and then they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll change my mind too.
Yeah. That's dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because think about like somebody who's in a relationship, and the other person is doing them wrong or stepping out, whatever it is, and somebody tells them, they're like, no, they would never do that to me. So that's like that social circle or something. Like, no, they would never. They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't steer me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's why it's important to be informed but not consumed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so crazy. Like, I don't know. I'm not even.
Yeah.
Well, just one more. Whenever I posted the picture that we have voted, some people, I had said something about how they open up the border to traffic all those kids.
Mm-hmm. Because
we've talked about it. We've interviewed people who were actually gone to the border and seen how it works. There's videos of people who go on like mission trips and talk to the people, the cartel that's now in jail, and they'll tell them like, yes, we're trafficking these children for this certain party.
Yeah.
Which I'm trying to be careful with what I'm saying because I want this video to stay up.
Yeah.
But the information is out there.
Yeah.
And they're arguing that it's just people trying to come here for a better life.
Yeah.
Like, you're literally just going to ignore the thousands of kids being trafficked.
Yep.
And say that it's people just wanting a better life.
Yeah, even the bracelets. People were trying to ignore the bracelets. When you can see on the news, they all had different bracelets on. And, I'll say Ted Cruz was like, he questioned them. He's like, why do they have these bracelets on? And they're like, oh, we don't know what bracelets. And you literally see kids with bracelets on walking in the background.
We live in a crazy world. But again, it's good to be informed.
Yeah.
But just know that just because you know things, you're going to be able to convince somebody else of what the reality is. Because at the end of the day, everybody's living in their own little world. They've made up their own reality.
Yeah.
And they'll rather hold on to that than have their reality shattered. Yeah.
Like, I'm sure there's some people listening that are like, oh, they're in their own little world. They're talking about us.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it goes both ways. Like, if you look at arguments online, it's like, they're everybody's so sure that they know what's going on. Yeah, and at the end of the day, I don't care what side it is. We're looking at the policies that align more with our biblical beliefs. Right. Yeah, and at the end of the day, we're not trusting the government to do anything. I watched the video, and I thought it was really good. And this guy's talking about how we're supposed to be the salt of the earth. Mm-hmm. And how the salt is supposed to slow the decay. So he was like, that's how you should vote. Like, it's not that this person is going to come save you or... He's like, you're just voting against the most evil. Yeah. Because you're trying to slow the decay. Mm. I thought that was really good. Yeah. I didn't know that about salt. Me neither. She also says, Knowledge and information cannot give us control. And then she uses the example of just because I know my husband doesn't mean I can control him. It says, at its best, knowledge can inform, equip, inspire, delight, and ultimately it should lead us to worship. And she also talks about how persuasion is about the soil, not the seed. So there's the parable in the Bible where he talks about the person who goes and throws seeds in land that's dry and land that has thorns, and then in good land.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the first one, like, it didn't have enough water, so it wasn't able to grow. The second one, it got choked up with the thorns, and then the good one, it actually flourished.
So it's not about the seed; it's about the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the soil is our heart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the soil represents our heart. So depending on how open our heart is to God, the good seed is we're more likely to give fruit.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it makes me think about regenerative agriculture. Like that soil, when it's not just industry, just building planting nothing but corn, and never giving time for that soil to replenish itself, never giving it what it needs. You know, you're not putting cows on it, you're not having chickens on it in free range. So that means like the dung's not there. You don't have dung beetles putting the nitrogen into it. So there's work that goes into that soil. So that's our work. Like we're working to get ready for God's seed to be planted in us.
Yeah, I like it. And it says, at the end of the day, it's not our human logic that moves people. It's Christ in us. And then I put, or in them. It just goes back to what you just said.
This episode was brought to you by BCN Supplements, our all-natural supplement company. And for our listeners, we do have a discount code if you visit our website, www.bcnsupps.com. You can use code BUILT, B-U-I-L-T, for 10% off. Thank you so much for listening.
And then the second form of control, or tool that we use to try to control, is power. It says, when we control someone or something simply because we can, we are exercising power. So then, of course, you have examples such as the government, employers, human traffickers, abusers. They do things just because they can. And it says power is perhaps the most tempting form of control because it's the most effective. And it says types of power. So you have verbal power. You have people who are really good at talking. She says even gossip can give us a sense of power. Or you could use it for good, like Jesus did. And he used his words to teach parables and to heal.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have emotional power. So this is when you use emotions to try to control someone. It could either be with anger or rage.
Mm-hmm.
Or something that is very common now is toxic empathy. And that is when people try to make you feel like you're a bad person if you don't go along with them.
Mm. Yeah, even in my project management classes, I talk about like the different kind of leaders. Mm-hmm. And one of my projects was comparing two different kind of leaders. And the leaders normally have power, right? So I compared two completely different people, and it was two different styles. One was an analytical leader who led by, this is what you're going to do or you're going to be fired. Mm-hmm. And the other one was a motivational leader, like who's really, they say like with a silver tongue. Mm-hmm. So I compared Elon Musk, who's very analytical, like this is what you need to do. If not, cut the fat, versus Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King, not saying he had a silver tongue, but he was that inspirational leader. He talked to people. He gave these great big speeches, and that's how they control, right? They're getting people to do what they want to do, even though it was a good influence. Not saying Martin Luther King was bad in any way that I know of. And he wasn't perfect either. I'm not going to say that. But the influence he was leading was for a good cause. And I'm not going to say Elon Musk is doing anything bad either, because he's trying to drive AI, which, if he uses it for good, it's great. If somebody uses it for bad, it's bad. But, same thing. It was just two different styles of leadership, and that's the same thing. Leadership and control go basically hand in hand. So I think that's pretty cool, like how she explained it there.
Mm-hmm.
And it just shows like, I don't know if that's another example for somebody to be able to understand like how somebody, you can use power. You say Elon uses money because he employs people, versus Martin Luther King was just using that emotion, something that hit home with people, that was slavery and all that, that he was trying to get equal rights.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. I like it. Thank you for that example. The next one is physical power. So that's actually using physical force, or just like being bigger than someone just automatically makes them scared, or the way you stand, if you're like have your arms crossed, or if you have your hands balled up in a fist. Just physical.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, it doesn't fall for everybody, and it's not all the time, but most of the time you see like if somebody is bullied, it's somebody defenseless, right? That looks like they can't defend themselves, and the bullier is normally a bigger dude.
Yeah. And then we have authoritative power, which would be doctors, teachers, parents. The people that can tell you because I said so.
Yeah.
And then you have spiritual power. So some people actually use God to manipulate people into doing what they want them to do, which it's not okay either.
Yeah. Yeah, like the religions that are like by your works you'll be saved. And all they're doing is trying to grow their pockets sometimes. I'm not going to say all of them or whatever, but that does happen a lot. They're like, oh, the more you give, the closer you'll be to heaven, and the bigger,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Or I mean, even the, I don't want to call out religion and be wrong, but whatever the Taliban was, it's like they sacrifice themselves. They'll have, was it like 70 virgins or something like that?
Something. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's why religion doesn't always have like the best reputation, because it's been used for bad.
Yeah, everything has.
Yeah, I was gonna say people don't know how to discern. Like everything can be used for good or bad.
Yep.
All right, so another form of control is money. So you'll have people who try to manipulate people through money. You'll hear them say things like everybody has a price. And then an example she gave was a woman being in an abusive marriage and not wanting to leave because of money. Maybe she's never worked before, so she feels like she can't survive without him. Yep. Or she has like this great luxury. I don't want to say great if she's in an abusive relationship, but like a luxury lifestyle. Yeah. And she's like, I'm not going to have that without him.
Yeah, she's like, I'm used to this lifestyle. I don't know how to live without it.
Yeah. And then another example I wrote down, I was listening to one of Candace Owens', not one of her podcasts, but Nick Cannon was interviewing her. Okay. And they were talking about how she's so controversial and how she just speaks the truth always. And he's like, if you would have leaned toward a different party, or if you would have gone with a certain narrative, he's like, you probably would have had less hate and more money right now. She's like, yeah. She was like, but what about my soul? She's like, I don't understand how people can just lie. She was like, whether it's for money or power or whatever reason. Yeah. She's like, that's not me. She was like, I can't live with myself. She was like, a bigger house isn't going to make me feel better about myself. She was like, I would just feel like a horrible person. She's like, no matter how much money, how big the house, how nice the cars. Yeah. She's like, no. Yeah. And I really admire that about her. But yeah, you'll see a lot of people just selling out. Yeah. Doing things they don't even personally agree with, but they're like, it'll make me money, so I'm going to do it. Yep. So the next one is autonomy. So it says we are taught to trust our instincts because only we know what is right for us. While this can be good, we need to make sure we are not overcorrecting and relying on our own understanding. And then it says we have confused control with freedom. We live in a culture that equates freedom with not having to do what anyone tells us to do. We are our freest when God alone is on the throne, not us. So we also see this a lot in our culture, where people think that they should be able to do whatever they want. Nobody should tell them anything. Nobody should be judging. And I saw a video, and it was somebody, and they were like, what if you just felt shame for once? They're like, instead of just trying to justify all the crazy things you're doing and saying that nobody should tell you anything and nobody should judge you. And I'm like, yeah, what happened to that?
Mm-hmm.
What happened to just, hey, just out of decency, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
And then it says, Adam and Eve had boundaries, and those boundaries allowed them to be free from sin. And what stole their freedom was sin. And I had a girl message me, and I haven't looked into the movie. Maybe we can look into it. I don't know. It's not a scary movie, but it's a thriller. So I don't know if I'll actually watch it. But she was talking about how, let me pull it up real quick because I thought it was interesting. She says there's a part talking about modern day slavery and how we did that to ourselves as a society. And then they use OnlyFans as an example. And how people think that they're free, but they're actually slaves to sin. And we can see that with OnlyFans. We can see that with so many other things when women are, not women, people, both men and women, are sleeping around and they're like, oh, I should have the right to do that. But they're just like collecting all these traumas from all those broken relationships, and they think they're being free, but in reality, they're enslaving themselves.
Yeah.
So, I haven't watched the movie yet, but...
What's it called?
It's not loading.
Oh. It's fine. We can talk about it later.
Yeah. But I thought that was interesting because I had heard that before, how no boundaries is actually... So we can use working out as an example. Like, let's say you're like, I'm going to eat all the donuts and have no restrictions and I'm never going to work out.
Mm-hmm.
Are you really free? Like, what did you just do?
10
years from now, if that's what you decided to do.
Yeah. Or you can even take the flip side and, like, somebody who starts doing steroids and they're like, they got in the shape they wanted to be in and they're taking a whole bunch of gear. It's called TRT now. It's taking gear. But they're doing that and they're abusing it and they're like, oh, maybe they become like an influencer and they feel like they have this life or whatever. What are they giving up? They're giving up, you have fertility problems from that. People are having heart attacks from that if they're not doing a blood dump or anything like that. So there's also the flip side, and it's still the exact same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. All right, so talking about autonomy, we can be in control or we can be in community, but we can't be both. And then she talks about how God describes us as a body of interdependent parts and how we should rely on each other, right? And for me personally, how I can relate to this is I used to not want to follow like any religious text if like it had, like, if a Bible had something explaining what it meant, or like devotionals or Bible studies, because I was like, it's going to be their opinion. And I think it's because I grew up with my family like questioning a lot of things, which they were probably right because maybe those churches weren't the right churches. But at the same time, it's not okay for me to just be like I feel like it is and it isn't. Because I feel like the Holy Spirit can teach you so much just by you reading it.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I feel like I've grown so much faster by joining the church that we did, by being involved, like we have been, in them, and learning from them. And everything they're teaching, I'm like, oh, okay, yes, I agree with this. I don't know why I was so against this before. Not necessarily that I was against it, but like I had that from childhood, which I understand because we've been to churches and we're like,
yeah,
I don't agree with that. But I feel like God blessed us with a really good church.
Yeah. Yeah, he did.
And then it says autonomy and only trusting in self can also cause anxiety. Thankfully, God sent us a helper, the Spirit, which dwells in us and in others. So yeah, and we talked about self-reliance before. How
we'll fail ourselves. We'll fail others. Others will fail us.
Yeah. So we need that higher power. And yeah, honestly, I'm so thankful for the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Because, and I think talking about what we were talking about before too, how some people create their own reality and they don't see things outside of what their social circle tells them.
Yep.
It's also because they don't have discernment.
Mm.
Because the Holy Spirit gives you a type of wisdom that the world doesn't have.
Yeah.
So then when you have that, like you see it so clearly, you're like, how are they not seeing this? And it's because they're lacking the Holy Spirit.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's something that I also had to understand. Like, no matter how much you try to tell them, no matter how much you try to explain to them. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about how they wanted to crucify Jesus. And they were asking for Barabbas. And I'm like, yeah, that's so true. Like if you were in that world right now and you're like, what are you doing? Why are you asking for him?
Yeah, to free him, for Jesus to take his place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously in that scenario, it was God had a plan.
Yeah.
But he will, like, I think I read it somewhere too in the New Testament where it says, like, he will literally cover someone's eyes or, like, their lack of understanding if he needs to do that for a certain reason.
Hmm.
So I feel like that also gave me, like, acceptance.
Yeah.
I guess, for me to not be so frustrated with certain people.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, you know what? Maybe they're just not meant to see it.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're not seeing because they're not right with God, and that's God's way of saying, come to me or you're going to stay lost.
Yeah.
You know? So, and logic isn't going to be more powerful than that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it goes back to when, so like their self-reality, right? Like the my truth and all that, in the autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people tell me who your 5 closest friends are and I'll tell you who you are, because that's like their reality. So a lot of people that I used to work with, it was like, they'd get out of work and their day was over. That to them, it's like, oh, my day's over. We just spent 10, 12 hours at work, sometimes more. They're like, oh, it's the end of the day. And I was always the one who said, my day starts when I hit that gate. And they're like, what? No, that's crazy. I'm like, dude, this is my morning. This is how I look at it. Because that was the reality to me. Like, this is my morning. And the rest, after 4:30 till 9, 10, 11, whatever, I was like, that's my day. That's when the majority of my day, I was like, I'm not going to be a person who just goes to work and goes home and falls asleep. And they were like, no, because the reality to them was their day was over because they got out of work at 4:30 and they couldn't do anything else. And I was like, no, like, I refused that. Mm-hmm. But that was their reality because that was the culture. Mm-hmm. And it was not, I wasn't the only one, but it was hard for me to find other people that were like that. They were like, we're still going to do stuff after work. You could still go drive 45 minutes to Pearline because I was in Freeport. Drive 45 minutes to Pearline or Houston if you want to go do something or do something around there. So it was, it was their reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why, to me, when I learned about limiting beliefs, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so true. Mm-hmm. So you basically you create your own reality. Yeah. Based on your beliefs. Like, what do you believe? And are your beliefs limited? Mm-hmm. And why are they limited? Is it because you're not trusting in a limitless God? And I've had conversations with people where they're like, oh, no, that's not possible. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm doing it right now? They're like, what? Oh.
I had a conversation actually at work the other day. Some people I used to work with, and they're working there now. And I said something. I was like, make sure you finish school. And the guy was like, oh, we can't do that. And I told him, I was like, yeah, you can. I was like, I did it. I was like, all you do is gotta, tell yourself what you really want. Mm-hmm. And then he was like, I was like, dude, we were working. I was working every single day. I was working 13, 14 hours a day. I was like, I was coming home to you and I was still knocking out all my schoolwork. And I was like, ask him. And the guy was like, yeah. He's like, he used to, instead of taking breaks with us, he would pull out his laptop and start writing essays while we were taking breaks. And the guy was like, no. He's like, for real? I was like, yeah. I was like, now look, like, I finished and there's better opportunities out there. But his limiting belief was like, oh, there's no time for it. There's no time for it. Mm-hmm. I was like, I'm not special. I was like, there's plenty of people who have done it. I'm just one example of that. I was like, and I can tell you, and there was somebody who's seen me do it. And he was like, oh, he's like, well, maybe. Like, you know, he was like, to him, it was unbelievable to be able to do. When I told him, like, I literally did it, he was kind of like, oh, like, well, I guess it is possible. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why it's so, again, we go back to the 5 people you surround yourself with. So important. And even if it's not someone like in your actual life in person, who are you listening to? Who are you watching?
Yep.
Because you see them do it and you're like, oh, it is possible. I didn't know that was possible. Or I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. The last one is shame. So sometimes people will use shame to try to control someone. And it says most victims will blame themselves, which then makes them think, I can prevent this from happening again, giving them a sense of control, well, a false sense of control. And the example she used was an alcoholic abusive parent. So the child will blame themselves, think that they were treated the way they were treated because of something they did. So they're like, oh, if I'm good tomorrow, my dad won't act like this, or he won't have this reaction.
Yeah.
Which is so sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of victims will blame themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives them like a sense of control to do that. Because I think to them it's easier to feel like they could have done something different versus I was literally helpless and there was nothing I could have done.
Yeah, they're giving that person an excuse that the person that's in the wrong, right? The abuser or the alcoholic, it's like, oh, it's my fault. So it's like I should have done better. I should have, I should have been in a better mood, or I should have not asked them questions. So it's a false sense of control. Like, oh, I could have controlled that, but no, like you said, it's very sad that they're giving their control away to the other person as well. Even when they're creating that false sense of control, it's like, oh, I should have done better. I should have been better. I should have, been happier. I should have, had food or whatever it was. They're giving the other person control, but they're giving themselves a false sense of control.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like I see that a lot. And if you're someone who went through something and you're blaming yourself for whatever reason, please ask God for forgiveness and allow yourself that forgiveness. Because I feel like I almost want to say it's a sin to be carrying that shame. I don't know if it's a sin. It's definitely not okay. You're giving permission to bad things into your life, I feel like, when you do that.
Yeah.
Because then the pattern repeats in different ways.
Yeah. I mean, another example that kind of kicks into my head, and it's almost the exact same thing, but it's like survivor's guilt. People will survive situations, or like a vet will survive and make it out, and, their brothers or sisters didn't, or like with the hurricane, people have like survivor's guilt, and then they're not living their life like to the fullest, to what they should be. They're like, I don't deserve it. I should have gone like that. Like they're just taking that away from themselves.
Yeah.
And it's sad to see because God has plans for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like that's also the enemy, because God has all these great plans for you, and the enemy will try to sabotage them any way he can. And a lot of the times he does it through shame.
Yeah.
And if you're someone who's holding on to shame, please come to God. Hand it over to him and be like, I know this doesn't belong to me. Please take this away from me. Forgive me for carrying this for all these years. Like I said, also allow yourself forgiveness. Forgive yourself for doing that to yourself as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another way that someone can use shame to control others is that they can tell them like, oh, you're too emotional. Like they'll shame them into, they'll use different things. So then I wrote down this page 107 because I thought it was a really good analogy that she used. So she talks about Adam and Eve in the garden. They recognize their nakedness and they feel shame. And then when God asks them, where are they? Said, that they were scared, so they hid. They knew they were naked. He's like, who told you? And then Adam blames Eve. So we have shame and blame. And then she says, fast forward thousands of years to the final moments of Jesus' life. We observe a similar progression. So then she talks about how he was mocked and humiliated, stripped naked, hung on the cross. So that echoes with the nakedness of Adam and Eve and shame. And then as he exhaled his final breath, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then in that moment, he experiences the separation and alienation of taking humanity's sin on himself, which would be blame. And then in the middle of Jesus' final moments on earth is the reenactment of Adam and Eve's final moments in the garden, shame and blame, except this time, these events are not transpiring under the limbs of a tree, but under the shadow of a cross. So then 3 days later, Jesus is raised to life in another garden, and the first person he appears to is a woman. So now you have a garden and a woman. So it's like flipped, like redeemed. So I just thought that was interesting how they tied it to. It says, and no longer is a woman the entry point of a lie. Now she is the entry point of truth. Because then she goes and she tells people what she just saw.
That's good.
Yeah. So everything done in the garden is undone by Christ. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, that is good.
Yeah. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close out this episode. I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as we did. Part 2 will be up next week. We'll talk about the rest of the book, which is what it cost us and the real power God promises. So I know we talked about all the bad things, but we'll talk about the one good thing at the end of it. Spoiler alert, it's Jesus. If you guys are feeling stuck in life or are going through a certain situation, you need someone to talk to, you need a coach, feel free to book a discovery call with me. We can see if we are a good fit to work together. I'll leave the link in the description. And I hope you guys liked this episode. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we go?
No, I'm good.
Yeah. If you did like it, give it a like. Leave us a comment if anything stood out to you. Share it with someone who you think might need to hear this. And we'll see you guys on the next one.